people like you together to hear presentations by people like Dr. Vivienne Ming. And I'm not going to say much about Vivienne, except that you're in for an incredible presentation. There was one sentence in her bio that really captured me, and that was the combination of machine learning with cognitive neuroscience to maximize students' life outcomes. I'm like, okay, this I've got to hear. And I'll also mention a couple of other things. Maybe Brian mentioned the bathrooms are out there should you need them. And also at the end, I'm also a photographer. Starting up a Facebook page for the Bay Area Entrepreneurs in Statistics. It just got started recently. So you folks in here have the opportunity to stick around for a group photo afterwards with great smiling faces, and that'll go up on that Facebook page. Okay? Dr. Ming.
Drag this chair around because I'm feeling a little tired. But we'll see as the talk goes along. I usually perk up as I go. So thank you for having me. I find myself at a point in my career where I give a lot of talks, despite not being a full-time academic anymore. In fact, last night I was here in the city. I live over in Berkeley. I was here in the city at the St. Regis for the World Affairs. I don't know if anyone ever listens to like the World Affairs and the Commonwealth Club and so forth. And I was in a room with about this many people, except it was Eric Schmidt and Reid Hoffman and the CEO of Whole Foods and the head of McKinsey, and we were deciding how to solve the shrinking middle class problem, which I thought was ambitious to do, shoot from the hip, 20 people in a room in an hour, we'll figure this out. Maybe it will change something, but it is interesting to see these people kind of interact. You know, you've got 4 billionaires and God knows how many $1 billion worth of corporate control in a room with the best of intentions. I don't know that everyone was having the exact same discussion, but it's fun and it's amusing. I do wish, although I know Eric is an engineer by training, and some of the other people in the room was certainly also, a lot of them are more MBA in background. I'd love it if more people like this room were not only solving some problems like this, because I know that many of you very likely are, but doing so with a place at tables like that. But my own take, and I'll have to remember what talk I actually put together here as we go. My own take is I want to build the world that I want to live in. Yeah, I want my kids to live in it also, but, you know, this is my escape plan is something of a reference to, without meaning it to be, to the recent comment by the Tesla guy, Mr. South Africa. So whatever, so I want to die on Mars and not on impact. So here it is. I'd love to get off this rock someday. That's not the only world I want to live in, but that's one, and I don't think we can do it off of the effort of that vast 1% of the world population. Not that anyone in this room necessarily comes from privilege, but what would it mean if everyone around the world truly had the possibility to get the kind of educations that we all had, or the kind of wealth that that other group of speakers had? Now that's a world I'd love to live in. Not because I'm a goody two-shoes, although maybe I have a little bit of that, but for selfish reasons, I want to reap all of those benefits. There we go. So, someone once asked me to come up with 5 words to describe myself. It's like one of those executive training exercises you're supposed to do. And as you all might appreciate, here I've got the mashup of my own PhD work in computational neuroscience and psychology, and so, you know, we can throw together parallel diversity allocation and locus ceruleus, and it doesn't take many words to uniquely describe yourself if you have that kind of background. But if you want to keep the language a little bit more accessible, and not just uniquely describe yourself, but actually your whole self, it gets a little more challenging. And this was a stab I made at it. Superpowers, Cyborgs, Taxes, Fanatics, and Reincarnation. And rather than explaining any of these, I'll just kind of dive into it and take it as a challenge to, at least one of those will be impossible to figure out because I don't think I have a slide referring to it. But see if you pick up on the themes as we go. Okay, interesting. So the very first, my start in all of this was I was at UC San Diego, where everyone thinks they're going to be a doctor. Like 85% of the entering freshmen think they're going to eventually leave academia with an MD. So that wasn't especially my wish, but I did think I'd be a wet neuroscientist. And then I took my first, and in fact only, programming course. And the instructor of that course brought me into his office afterwards and said, will you teach the course with me next year? And I've recommended you for this place called the Machine Perception Lab, run by Synopsis. And at the Machine Perception Lab, I was introduced to machine learning. And the project that I basically learned how to program and learned about machine learning and learned everything was doing lie detection for the CIA off of videos. So no audio, you don't know what the person's talking about. All you've got is a video, and you've got to tell whether this person's telling the truth. It was some elaborate thing where there was like they'd walk into a room and open a drawer and look down and they'd either be money or not, and they get the money if they could convince someone else, whether, I don't know. So back then, that was a really challenging problem. We had to capture a three-dimensional model of those faces, rotate them out of plane. We had these really cool demos where you'd have the person talking on one side, and then you'd have them facing straight forward, all the same actions except the shadows were going back and forth across their face. And then we had to apply what at the time was state-of-the-art, which has Gabor filters arrayed around these face images, frame by frame, to track the expressions being tracked, turn them into what's called facial action codes, and send that to the CIA, because they wouldn't actually tell us what their magic formula was for lie detection, only that when their experts did it at a frame rate of about, it took a couple minutes on each frame, that they were about 80% accurate. Essentially, they just wanted us to automate it, and they figured if we could get them the facial action codes, which is this sort of famous system for turning images of faces into micro-expression recordings, that they could take it from there. So this is a competition between our lab and Takeo Kanadi's lab at Carnegie Mellon at the time. And neither of us won, because neither of it worked. Yeah?
Were you working with Dr. Paul Ackman at all?
So Paul was the joint PI on this work from our side. And so that lab has now spun off and become a company called Motioned down in San Diego. And they now, like lie detection and all the stuff off the videos, seemingly trivially easy. But so they're making a whole business out of doing this as a service. You can go check out their site, but Paul Ackman is part of their advisory board. Synopsis is part of their advisory board. Okay, that's just setting the stage. So what you're seeing here is my own model. This is being trained on Flickr. So we simply went through and did some basic face detection and alignment, grabbed images off of Flickr, created this giant database in color, fairly high resolution, typically for most of this work back then, and learned essentially a sparse coding model for faces. So normally when I talk to lay people, I talk about how we can create sentences, but this is a linear generative model with a sparse prior. And it turns out it is extremely accurate. If you've ever done face work before, what's fascinating fascinating is this is the learning of the network. These are the individual code words out of a subset out of something like 10,000 code words. So these massive scale dictionaries, relatively sparse composition. And none of those people exist. Like they're all, no one had ever done sort of this scale and this color resolution. So the ones that really look like people we ended up calling anchor faces. And these are almost like these prototypical faces that you find. All sorts of fascinating stuff in there about the distributions, how certain facial trees. So if you look at, say, take this embedded space, project everything into it, then look at the first three principal components. You see the first principal component variation is male versus female? No. It's male versus smiling female. Because we're looking at how faces actually vary in the world, not how an engineer would build it. Next dimension is Caucasian versus Asian. No, it's Caucasian versus Asian. When you push it out too far extreme, they're wearing glasses. In this subset of images that we pulled off of Flickr, that was the actual statistics. Again, if you're an engineer, you build all of this modularly, but statistically, that's how it tied together. All of that is set up because most of my audiences, I never get to talk about the technical detail of anything. So here's the entrepreneurship part. My very first tech company, we're out. We built this model that one VC responded to as, you can read students' minds. Here's $2 million if you do financial fraud detection. Now, as you might imagine, having used the word student, financial fraud detection was not part of our business plan. That was basically, which he also follows up with, and I have the perfect CEO for you, with my co-founder and CEO literally sitting right next to me in the moment. It was, we like her and we like her technology, we're going to strip it. So, instead, we wanted to prove that this really worked. So, I'd worked with faces before, so I built this system called Sexy Face. Because what else would you do in 2007 or something with the early rise of Facebook than make an incredibly tasteless social game? Where for free, you go and select, so we give you an array of 18 faces, you select the ones that you find sexy. And then it's an active learning process behind the scenes. Turns out, in fact, the visual version is surprisingly simple. Support vector machine gets trained on every pass of the feedback, and then we just select based on the distance from the support vectors. Really simple. There is some work showing that heuristically it's a good approach for active learning. Works really well here. 3 or 4 screens. Didn't matter how weird and freaky you were. It knew the faces you thought were sexy. Now the important thing on entrepreneurship is for $5, we'll tell you who thinks you're sexy. But the truth is it could learn anything. So it wasn't actually made to be sexy, it was just arbitrary, right? We could show it. I mean, it didn't even necessarily have to be faces, it was just that we had a latent space of faces to work in. In reality, it could learn anything. So you just, once you did the sexy face, then it told you the reality, which is that this is a scientific project, and we're trying to learn how people perceive faces. What you're seeing is this was before 2007. Only the very earliest papers out of Jeff Hinton's lab about sort of what would come to be called deep neural networks were in vogue, or in that case, deep networks. But this was a deep model because we had layers dedicated to faces, and then we had another set of layers dedicated to how you perceive faces. So those are the ones being trained. Eventually, we went beyond the support vector machines, and we had a classifier that was working on your perception of faces. So you could just pick anything out. All right, I want a competent Southeast Asian with mutton chops. At least if you got some actual positive examples, that it would learn it. And it wouldn't take many screens for it to pick up on it. A little spooky. So it was great. It was a demo. So we got to demonstrate this for a variety of people. Even that is a lie, though. That wasn't the actual purpose. The actual purpose was for a program called Refugees United, run as part of the Millennium Cities Initiative for the United Nations. There are 1 million orphan refugees around the world in refugee camps. No family, their existing family is dead or dislocated in a way that no one can reconnect them. No one knows who extended family members are. It's just a baby. It's a little kid. They're there. In fact, it was interesting. I was just on one of the local news sites, and they had a bunch of photos of San Francisco from the 1960s, one of which was a picture of 1860s, one of which is a picture of this old orphanage, which was founded because a family arrived here and both of the parents had died of cholera, and so they had this whole posse of kids, and they stuck them in the orphanage. So the UN has a huge problem with this. So you're an uncle in Damascus, you haven't heard from your sister's family in northern Syria in months, and you're fearing the worst. You go down to the refugee office, and there's literally a book with 1 million photographs in it. Yes, we know it's Syria in this time frame, so we've cut it down to a couple 100,000. What do you do? Hopefully, they're using tablets at this point, at least for the photos, but we thought, well, what if we deploy this technology? And we make some small modifications. We show you a grid of 18 actual faces in the system, and you select the ones that are in the direction. In this case, rather than randomly selecting faces initially, we're selecting the most different faces based on our latent space. You select differences, and it drills down into some manifold inside that face space, that even inside the face space, and now you select faces from this subset. What we found was after about 3 to 5 screens, 50 to 100 faces, the one you're looking for was almost certainly on the next screen. It went from literally people spending days coming back week after week to look through the books to, in a couple of minutes, you knew whether, I mean, if you know their face well enough, you knew whether your niece or nephew was in a camp somewhere. So this is me meeting the president. This is the first ever presidential photo taken through Google Glass. Very proud of that. I'm particularly proud of the fact that, and yes, part of the reason I think Glass was not a success is it took a great photo of the wrong person. I don't know how Admiral Nelson there is, but he's not the guy I'm interested in. So, my wife and I were invited to the White House for some work that I will speak about later, and I swear to God, I asked the Secret Service if I could wear glass inside the White House. And the guy says, oh yeah, sure. I think he had no idea what he was answering. So instead, I'm wandering around the White House with the president and the vice president there. By the way, Joe Biden has the biggest teeth of any human being I've ever seen. It's literally kind of scary. I found myself like clenching my teeth, so like don't have any exposed fingers when you're around Joe Biden. So I'm there with a live camera. So this gigantic man with a little spirally thing coming out of his ear walks up to my wife and I as we're like gobbling through the desserts, because they actually have pretty good food spread at these things. And he walks up and he says, is that Google Glass? Yeah. So it takes photos? Yeah. And it does video? Like, do you want to buy a pair? What is this? I don't work for Google, but I could put it in a good word for you. They had given me an early release pair to experiment with. So, and he said, please don't live stream the president. I'm like, wow, that is so polite. I wish the TSA, just as you walk past, said, please don't blow up the plane, you know? Keep everything in your pockets. So that was it. But not only that, what I discovered afterwards is the CIA had a total meltdown. When they saw me, I personally wasted 5 minutes of the most powerful man in the world's time deciding whether to kick me out of his house. In the end, he decided not only to stay, but that he wanted to meet me. So he pops out of this tiny little secret door to the side. That guy had walked up to my wife and I right beforehand and said, step back and you can stay right here. I mean, it was obvious what this was about, so the president pops up and he walks out and he just shakes. He's so like, you're wearing fluorescent blue on your head right now in my house. You're messing with the feng shui of the whole place. Goes over, big smile, handshake of some donor right next to me, walks back past me, just again, the big head shake. Smiles, shakes the other person. The whole time my wife, we've been standing in front of the portrait of Kennedy, trying to do like the first ever selfie I've done in my whole life. And when the Navy guy walks up to us, and so we had the camera pointing wrongly. The whole time my wife is staring at the camera telling me, I can't get it to point she doesn't realize the president is now standing right in front of us. She's trying to flip the camera around to get a photo of him. So I say, okay, class, take a photo, and there you go, the first ever. Turns out he's a really nice guy. We had a fun conversation afterwards. But the reason I show this is for something else I did with Google Glass. So it looks to me like he's happy here, which is, you know, some interestingly impressive face perception given the fact that the photo's so blurry and the illumination, specularity right there. I mean, like the bane of all image processing, at least historically in my experience. We don't have a problem. We can still see, I can see his teeth. I don't know for certain, but it looks that way. So what if you can't read people's facial expressions? You can recognize who someone is. This isn't what's called prosopagnosia. This is just, they're smile, they're unhappy, they're sad, you don't get it. You don't get it for free. The rest of us do. You don't. It's like learning a foreign language. So that's autism. Autism has a lot of other things as well, but that's one of the classic symptoms of autism. So based on kind of what I told you about my original lab, we thought, what if we take these whatever, and take the camera, process your face, extract the facial action codes, estimate the emotion, write it in the screen. And yes, to a lot of the world that sounds very spooky, but I often contend if you want to outlaw that, then what happens to all those autistic kids that we did this for, we put it on them, and now they can learn how to read facial expressions in natural interactions. The state of the art today is still flashcards with cartoons on them. Imagine that I could actually interact with you, and if I'm not getting it, it still tells me that you're pissed off, or you're happy, or anything, and I can act on that if I'm what's called a high-performing autistic. But you can really learn, and the amazing thing is you don't just learn how to perceive faces. It literally increases what's called perspective taking, which is really just another word for empathy. So they're better able to attribute motivations and internal states to other people after they learn how to read facial expressions. So, you know, we get a lot of this stuff in like the event I was at last night, where we were really talking about how does technology, is it shrinking the middle class, and what do we do about it? Where the reality is technology always comes with costs and benefits. Technology is a really broad term. Social technology is coming. This isn't the only form of technology in the world. So, to me, it's always about playing up the strengths while not living with the cost, but learning how to mitigate and offset the costs as much as possible. And anyone who tells you that, you know, whatever, the security on their side is perfect and we will never get, they're lying to you. There are always costs. And it's always about playing up the strengths and playing down the costs. I think there are amazing things that could have been done with Google Glass if they hadn't focused so much on these lightweight social things. Yeah?
So has any work been done with Google Glass and autistics to...
Yeah, so we have an experiment running at University of British Columbia right now. It works. You can do the expression recognition in real time, although I admit, in real time in which we had it hooked up directly to a little pack, because there isn't enough juice on the thing to do this. I don't know if anyone saw it, there was a Glass app, which you can get for your phone also, but it was impressive on the Glass side. It translates road signs in near real time. But the Glass one is interesting because they put it entirely on Glass. So it was not running in the cloud. And the amount of, they ended up getting bought by Google, the amount of work they had to do to all extraneous computation out, everything gone. You can still feel it heating up a little bit on your head. So it just didn't have the juice to make it work. But if you hook it up to a heavy-duty phone at the same time, it can work. And so they're running this experimental trials. So they can really transform people's lives, and I would hate to lose the opportunity to do that. Or a lot of other things that I won't talk about, but work, for example, this is much more ambitious, but take a mobile EEG rig, Google Glass. Now you would use, you recognize? What are your memory events like? What are your emotional states like as you move throughout the day? And then as the disease begins to progress, you, as we would say in education, you begin to scaffold that. So imagine via the mobile EEG, and no, there is not a current mobile EEG which has resolution good enough to do this, but talking about doing preliminary work, imagine with that EEG, you detect a memory failure, let's say it's your daughter, and we detect a memory failure is about to occur. So you flash up on the screen her name, and the experience of which is, yeah, of course. But imagine the difference between this seemingly arbitrary memory and looking at your own daughter and not remembering what it is. The loss of self, the loss of independence that comes with those experiences. Probably, who knows, probably wouldn't have a life-extending capability, but that extension of independence and identity would be profound. I would love to have something like that. So the first word on my list is a giveaway. If you cannot read facial expressions, that's a superpower. If you want to somehow magically know where in the world your niece or nephew is, that's a superpower. As I would say when I speak to crazy numbers of people at GE, and someone walks into a room like this with the lights off, and suddenly they can see in the dark because they flipped a switch, that's a superpower. Somehow you have to figure out how to make people to make light bulbs feel good about themselves. But that's my approach to product development. Give people superpowers. No one wants to buy lightweight social. I will wear fluorescent plastic gear on my head if you give me a superpower. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So this person was discovered to be the cutest human on the face of the earth. And you can trust me because I'm a scientist. It's only pure coincidence that this happens to be my son. So, and he is such an interesting guy. I mean, honestly, just tells. I have, after about hour 4, the look in an adult's face when they realize he's not actually going to stop telling me this story is something I truly treasure. So about 4 years ago, I had the worst Thanksgiving ever. On Sunday before Thanksgiving, he throws up. And then he's sort of seemingly sick and throwing up throughout the week. By Wednesday evening, he can't stand up. And, we finally really get a good look at him because they've been in bed all week. He'd lost 15 pounds off a 40-pound frame. It's 4 years old. So, turned out he had type 1 diabetes. And for those of you who may not know, it's an autoimmune disease, much less common than type 2, which is this sort of classically health lifestyle disease, although that's a little unfair also. But this is an autoimmune disease, probably exposed to a virus which expressed some sort of protein that his immune system wiped out, and then, oh, hey, look, this strange thing expresses the same protein, which unfortunately turns up in his cells that make insulin. So you could literally smell the sugar coming off of him. His sweat was sweet, and he was delirious, and it was a nightmare. And we go to Oakland Children's Hospital, now UCF Benioff Oakland Children's Hospital. I suppose the world isn't worse for having billionaires in it. And you then start a 24-hour period where they slowly titrate his blood sugar levels down. So it's literally starving to death, filled with sugar. And the only way to get rid of it is to sweat it and pee it out. So now they're slowly putting insulin in. If they just, which as would be entirely possible, just dump a bunch of insulin in him and he dies of shock. So for 24 hours, top and bottom of every hour, 10 minutes, waking him up, pumping him full of stuff, doing measurements, by the end of which he's delirious and screaming. 10 minutes with me holding him and quieting him down, and then 10 minutes on a cot next to his bed. And then it starts over again for 24 hours. So, not fun. But here's what really galled me. We leave the hospital, and we start this Google Doc spreadsheet. everything. My wife and I are both scientists. We met in graduate school. She's a cognitive psychologist who studies education. I'm a computational neuroscientist, theoretical neuroscientist. I have also a psychology degree, but I'm a psychologist. Not that kind. So we start collecting everything. The top of that spreadsheet, goose, 89 grams. I was on a goose thing for Thanksgiving at the time. It's good. Mashed potatoes, 169 grams. We recorded to the gram everything he ate, all of his activity levels, all of his blood glucose readings, just notes. Looks like he might be sick. All of these things. We did our research and we read might be related. Internally we're trying to essentially track cortisol release levels and adrenaline because they interact with these other hormones. And just figuring all this out. And in retrospect, of course it was naive. Then we print all of this out and go in so excited to show his doctor that first month back in the hospital. And they were angry with us. How dare you waste our time? What are we supposed to do with all this? They gave us a single photocopied sheet of paper. It had 5 days, 3 boxes, 15 numbers. We were supposed to write it down. 15 blood glucose readings. Not even the 15 most recent, just arbitrarily pick one because we were doing lots of recordings early on. The parents usually do lots of recordings. And then they squinted at it for about 3 minutes. And then said, okay, here's what we're going to do for the next month. So in other words, here's going to be the parameter settings. It wasn't insulin at the time, but it works sort of the same. You have 2 different kinds of insulin for injections. One is this very slow release kind that runs throughout the day, and the other is immediate for what's called boluses for eating. Essentially, insulin pumps just do the same thing. So essentially, they say, here are your slow parameters, and here are your fast parameters for doses. Done. Based off squinting at 15 numbers. And I thought, are you fucking kidding me? I make models of the brain. Are you telling me diabetes is more complicated than the brain? So I immediately started working on what we call jitterbug. All of my projects start off with ballroom dance names, just as a thing. That's how my wife and I met. So jitterbug. And my initial goal was just to do that slow parameter estimation, but in real time. So my son, we very quickly bullied the insurance company and the doctors ended up hooking him up with a continuous glucose monitor, which every 5 minutes estimates glucose levels from subcutaneous fluid, so it's not accurate, but it gives you an estimate. And then actual blood readings, and then we had a wireless insulin pump that he uses. Plus we got something called a basis band. I don't know how many of you remember that. I think it got bought by Intel. Basically, it's an iWatch. It's sort of like it's a Fitbit, but it also tracks heart rate and a really lazy galvanic spin response. So basically perspiration. So we hook my son, we had to put it on his ankle because he was too skinny to wear this thing on his wrist. So he's wearing this on his wrist, he's got all these things on. And then we had to hack them, right? Because these are all proprietary. Even though the data is literally coming out of my son's body, it streams to some black box server somewhere and gets dumped into Dexcom's database and all of the other companies that make these devices. Even, quite frankly, even Fitbit and so forth. Yes, you can then look at their website to see the data, but nobody wants to share raw data with you. So we start poking around. Turns out there are a lot of other parents that don't like that also, and I figured it out with a little Python and the right coding and so forth, and an old phone, you could stream this to your own system. They've done it all in Nodes and Microsoft Azure, which, not to badmouth Microsoft, but hell no. So I did it all in Python. And so we hacked all this stuff, we got all of the parameters, and again, we were collecting everything. No one's going to do this long term, I get it. But first pass of this. Initially, I just wanted to be able to get real-time updates on his pump settings. Like, it changes. Where it's placed, you have these immediate discontinuities. Like, overnight, the efficacy drops. If he gets ill, it's actually, we know with my son if he's about to catch a cold. Or better description is, he's about to show the clinical effects of having a cold. Because long before that ever happens, his blood glucose levels and his liquid would go up. So you have all of these fluctuations, most of which are unaccounted for, none of which you actually deal with in the parameter settings of the pump. You just set them for 3-month periods and ignore them, and I thought that's crazy. So we set this thing up to basically be a closed loop, and it would say very quickly, it would take the event of a new infusion site and automatically update all of the pump settings for the new, basically test what's effective. How would it test it? Roughly, you can kind of think of this as expectation maximization, right? We have our dosing. That's sort of like we're trying to keep the blood glucose levels optimally flat. Again, I never get to go into technical details and stuff. We want to keep it optimally flat. We take this into different space, so we're taking sort of the first order difference, the fluctuation of blood glucose levels. But we want to keep that optimally flat, and so we do that by then updating the parameter settings by giving it, saying, okay, given the current settings, here are the optimal doses which should keep us optimally flat. You do them. It picks up on the resulting fluctuations, and it updates the settings. Every time you do a dose, you're essentially doing a run of this sort of two-sided optimization process. Great, and it did what it did. It gives you optimal dosing. So basically, to make it simple, I said there's going to be, and all of these things are very stereotyped, so we don't have to learn the functional form of anything. Basically, it's very sort of gamma and on both sides. The doses of insulin and the effects of food have these very smooth sorts of behaviors. So we just said, you get 3 doses, pick the points in time and the magnitudes to make them happen. So, I'm a bit lazy. I do a lot of work in sparse coding. That sounds kind of like a sparse coding problem. So we run this as a pursuit algorithm implementation. And sure enough, at least in simulation, we truly know all of, we get truth to our data, keeps the things amazingly smooth. Like, here's what was really cool, and I should have realized, but unexpected. This is effectively pulled out of my work as a theoretical neuroscientist doing work in sensory coding. Well, sensory coding tends to be predictive. The easiest way to minimize the bit cost of transmitting information is just predict it, and then only transmit the difference. So that's what this does. It predicts out into the future. It says, here are the 3 insulin doses which will maximally flatten that out. Then as we move into the future, it gives a certain confidence interval, and if it moves outside of that, it is guaranteed to be, Felix will go high or low based on these predictions in the next hour, which there's nothing like that. Still, there's nothing like that on the market. And I didn't invent anything. I had to do some, technical details to make it all work. But there was no fabulous invention here. We built a system that predicts for diabetics whether they'll go high or low in the next hour. And if you were exhaustive, it did it with virtually 100% accuracy. You can trim that all down and make it more of an estimate. But imagine, I don't know if you maybe have diabetes, but imagine that you can keep as healthy as a regular human. In fact, better than many people that drink Jamba Juice or Coke. And I'll get you in just a sec. And we built that. So here's the thing: we use it on Felix. It worked really well, even in the real practical world of the fact that we're not tracking everything. And we were able to cut the amount of time he spent in a high blood sugar range by 40% without affecting or increasing at all the amount of time spent in a low range. So I wore Google Glass to the White House because I was in DC, and at one point I got a message that said that my son in Brisbane, because he was staying with my sister, was going to go low, and I sent her a text message to give him a crack. So he never went low. So question.
That's amazing. What was the time frame of development to be successful?
It was actually pretty quick. I said I repurposed a lot of work I'd previously done, which is always the easiest way to do everything. So building the model was quick. It took me a week to put the model together. Then I had to train myself how to make an app, because I'd never done that before. In this case, a glass app that would be receiving the other end of things. I am not a happy programmer. I'm a computational scientist. I am neither a data scientist nor am I a programmer. So I program because I have to get things done. My job as an entrepreneur is to put myself out of a job, like every job. You start doing all of them, I don't want to do any of them. So it took me about a week to develop the model. It took me probably a month to actually turn it into something that would run. And again, why redo it? So there's something called Night Scout. That was the hack for the continuous glucose monitor that streamed it to Azure. I just took that stuff, turned it all into Python code, and ran it inside Compute Engine, because I've been doing a lot of stuff with Google.
So two things. Isn't that against some property of HIPAA that you're supposed to be able to have access to your health data? And I don't know if it's like specifically in raw format, but I'm not sure.
It probably depends on how they define it. So all of these devices allow you to access your data via their system.
Yeah,
so it automatically streams to them. Then you can essentially request it back in a screenshot format. So with you, I think it is. And I'm more than that. I am looking forward to the day at which I have had the opportunity to say, in fact, both to Eric Schmidt and to Reid Hoffman in person, where we stop siloing all of these data repositories. Open them up, make a market for them. Quit trying to control everything. It's very frustrating. I realize there's fears because you're not able to, it's a form of desirable market distortion, right? Google search is better than everyone else's, not because of their algorithms, it's because of their data history. No one can compete with that, even a giant competitor like Microsoft can. So it's a form of monopoly, and if you've got a monopoly, why would you willingly walk away with that? I will get to some other issues there where I think it plays out. Interestingly, on the other side, I thought you were going to ask this. I can do almost anything I want to with my son, particularly if it actually makes him healthier. I literally can't even give the code away to anyone else. That would be giving medical advice, and I'm a fake kind of doctor, so I can't do that. I donated it to a nonprofit called the Type Foundation. So they call themselves the Mozilla for Diabetes. So they're a nonprofit that makes open source code for diabetes. And they take that time and make the effort to work with the FDA and the device makers. I mean, they literally just go to the device makers and say, listen, you people are terrible at software products. So just, you build the device, let us build a front end for it.
It's amazing to me that you as this one person and not a programmer could develop all this, yet big insurance companies or device manufacturers can't put this together. You did in less than 2 months?
Yeah. Well, it is crazy, but you have to appreciate some of the incentive systems that are in place for the device makers. If they want to change the color of their device, that has to go through the FDA. I'm not giving them a pass, but honestly, from their perspective, no one else has got this. So what's the rush for us to put it in our devices? Yeah.
So it's got an FDA approved.
It's kind of up to Typepool to go through the approval process.
Also going through the
Yeah.
approval process.
So they've made a software suite where you can connect all of your devices together, and again, it's free. At least if you set up your own hosting, you can download all of this. Go to GitHub, I think, and set it up. Put it on your own server. You can run it for free. For like $5 a month, they'll host it for you. And it connects. You can connect all of your devices, even your Fitbit, together. And they didn't have any, for lack of a better term, data science behind it. So I thought I'll just give it to them because they're good people. The founder was an exec at Amazon, and his daughter was diagnosed, and 2 months later he quit and founded the nonprofit. Okay, more superpowers. But the reason I did it was after a little while of being scared every single night that your child's going to die, you realize that, well, not that it won't happen, but it hasn't happened yet, and everybody needs to move on. I still spend lots of nights. I have alarms set up that pick up on low blood sugars and so forth. But you kind of move on. What was really frustrating is that as his blood sugars would move up and down, he is a teacher, so he developed a reputation for being emotional. That's because you're doing a shitty job of taking care of his blood sugars while he's at school. So, you know, that was the real motivation, is he had this life story in front of him, and it was pretty great. Largely through no effort of his own, but still, it was pretty great. And as your mom, you don't care whether he deserves it or not. You want your kids to have a great life. So, I was not going to accept that this was going to change that. So I sit on the board of a company called Emoja. I'm also their chief science advisor. They're based in New York. I'm going to hang out with those guys next week. I'm on the vice chair of a nonprofit called Start Out, and they won a pitch competition that we ran in New York. So really like them. So what are they trying to do? Despite actually the image, which is not theirs, I just stole this from somebody. They take mobile phones and passively, or this is my preferred language nowadays, surreptitiously estimate your emotional states. So what's the easy way of doing that? We read your text messages, we pick up on the prosody of your side phone conversations, all sorts of things that can make this easy. Emoja does it without using any of that. So it's based on accelerometer, gyroscope, ambient noise, ambient sound, ambient light, pull in weather conditions, pull in stuff about patterns of behavior over time. And it turns out it's a lot harder and maybe not quite as accurate in the moment, but we can get good emotional state estimations off of people just from them carrying around their phones. It's better for men than women, because men tend to carry it literally on their body, whereas what I usually, not today, but I often have it in my purse. So we don't just build distinct models, but in doing a lot of mixture modeling, a lot of the mixture job is pulling apart these sort of sensor or device specific things that really aren't about emotional states, but we need to do a good job of pulling out the invariances so we can focus on what's important. Okay, so that's their job. What is their business plan? That's something they've been working on for a long time. So you could obviously see them doing some sort of advertising work. Here's what I've been pushing them hard on, and I think may actually be a winner, is it's sort of a two-prong attack. First, you actually pay people to put that full app on, the one that does everything. Eyes wide open, we pay you $10 a month, and we're going to read your emails. We're not going to share it with anyone. We're going to follow your side of conversations, all that sort of thing. But we're paying you and totally transparent about it. Why are we doing this? And why would you do it for only $10 a month? Because along with $10 a month, you get tickets to the latest premieres. And you get discounts on the hottest new products. Some of them even pre-release. Why? Because it's product market research. We send these people out, they interact, we get 10,000 people who we're tracking in real time. Not 24 hours, honestly, but we're tracking them in real time, maybe 16 hours a day. And we know what is their experience with riding the subway in New York. Well, we do a lot of New York-focused stuff. What is their experience with this new watch device? What are their emotional states around all of these things, and how has it changed during the day as they engage? And then pair that with apps that we build inside of other people's apps. So I just referred to the subway system, the MTA in New York. We did a trial where we stuck our via a software developers kit, it gets stuck into the MTA's app. But now we don't get any of the special, really invasive permissions. We only get these very passive ones. But it's still really valuable. It turns out, what they want to know is, first off, if someone is taking the one downtown, it would be great to know if everybody's pissed off. Is there something going on that we should be made aware of? But more, for their purpose, they really want to know, actually, how did people feel before they got on the train? And then how do they feel afterwards? How are we affecting people's days? The side effect, and leading into my personal interest, is in a single week of making those recordings, with everyone running the MTA app on the subway system, we probably collect more emotion-related data points than have ever been collected in every emotion lab experiment in the history of mankind. And of course, as you're probably all aware, Google and Facebook and Apple and so forth, essentially doing the same thing all the time. So they have us eclipsed. But here's what I want to do and why I agreed to join their board. Let me use your data to predict manic and depressive episodes of bipolar sufferers. So bipolar disease, if you don't know it, if you've ever seen the show whatever it is, the show with there's this bipolar character and she goes through these wild creative phases and then shifts into this terrible depression and sort of wildly goes back and forth. And somewhat famously, if you ever read Ben Horowiz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, he talks about they hired this 100x developer, terminology that I'm not a fan of, and he said this guy was amazing. In 3 days he did his first project that we thought would take him a month, and then he knocked off another, and then we didn't hear from him for a month. And in the end, it turned out he had bipolar disorder and I had to fire him. And he was very, he said it was a sad thing, but I had to, and I'm sympathetic to Ben, and I'm sympathetic. To be honest, I'm a little more sympathetic to the engineer. Like, this is an amazingly talented person who lost his job, who has a vastly higher rate of getting divorced, who has a very real chance of getting chronically institutionalized. But the flip side is you take medication. And the classic experience of taking medication for bipolar disorder is it just deadens the world. All of that life and creativity you felt is gone. So you don't. And then when you're in a manic phase, you feel like you're better than you ever were, and so you don't want to get treatment, and everything's a mess. Well, what if all you had to do was carry your phone around, and every now and then you, and importantly, trusted confidants, could be a doctor if you trust someone, could be a best friend or a relative, get a message. High probability of a manic episode in the next 2 weeks. Take a week off from work, and don't get fired. Go visit your doctor, maybe up your medication temporarily, and don't get a divorce, and God, don't get institutionalized. This isn't the reason, but in doing a little poking around, it turns out this is the costliest mental health disorder. $70 billion a year goes into bipolar disorder. And of course, the same principle applies to major depression, it applies to post-traumatic stress disorder, a number of other issues that take potentially otherwise happy, productive people out of their life. And it turns out you can do it. It's very hard. If you're exhausted, in fact, if you literally bring people into the lab and run experiments, they've done this with people with genetic predispositions, you can detect the onset of the first manic episode by 6 to 8 weeks through changes in cognitive function, sleep behavior, affective responses. So here we're just looking at, it's not like static. Of course, if I know, like, right now what your gyroscope says, that is not going to tell me anything. It's trajectories over time. So the most classic would be with major depression, when you see certain movement behaviors and then bam, like you see these very sharp changes. Almost always, yes, in the way I'm signaling, almost always much less movement, much more localized at home, you visit fewer places. But it turns out the time it takes to identify these transitional states is really pretty fast. You don't have to wait days to pull out of it. Over the course of a single day, it can be very clear when transitions like this are happening and pick up on it. So this is what we're building on top of Emotion's platform. This is an indicator of my start from being, the transition from me being a scientist into at least being someone that built things instead of being, and then eventually an entrepreneur. So this is work I did back when I was a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon. I literally took a microphone around in the forest. This is another sparse coding dictionary. In this case, this was long before the rise of the deep neural networks here, but this was a convolutional model. So it was very cool. Andrew extended this work in building his own deep auditory models. But we just literally took a microphone around the forest and it learned how to hear by just information theory. So we were maximizing the coding efficiency. So you can kind of see down at the bottom, our synchronous noise is increasing, our entropy, our cost of encoding is decreasing over time. And as it does that, it learns this functional form for a set of kernel functions to describe natural sounds. In this case, again, literally, it's the breaking of twigs, of my footfalls, it's the wind through the leaves, water and the sounds of bird songs, and mammalian vocalizations. Turns out, when you reach the very end of the animation, those and it was also some nice little things, so we built it in so it could dilate or contract to actually fit the real time scale. So because these things were convolutional, they could fit anywhere in a sound, and it would simply learn the right time scales for this to take place. So you didn't have to make some arbitrary windowing trade-off. So no windowing, any of you who do extensive signal processing, is so much better than any windowing work. Turns out if you take these kernel functions and lay them over reverse correlation filter estimates of the filtering properties of what are called the auditory ganglion cells. So these are the cells that take information from your cochlea along your 8th cranial nerve into your auditory cortex. They don't just look like that. All we did was unit norm both functions and lay them on top of one another. We'd look for the best fit for one animal and one training set. Every one of them fall right on top of each other. It was like spookily similar. So then we went to check it. We ran it across, well, what if we trained it just on music? Or we trained it just on bird song, or just on the wind flues and so forth. All produced totally different dictionaries. None of them match the mammalian auditory set. We found one other class of signals that produces the same functional form as biology, and that's human speech, and it didn't matter what language it was. So I say that broadly. We looked at English, Taiwanese, and Arabic, but I'm pretty confident you could go look at any of them and it wouldn't matter. Except some really very idiomatic languages, so ones with very small speaker sets. But generally speaking, we find this to be true, and then we did work where we built hierarchical versions of this where it could learn pitch perception all by itself, including some really quirky neuroscience of pitch, like you can create sounds that have no harmonics, but they have a pitch percept. And you can create other sounds that have harmonics, but have no beating and still have a pitch percept. And this higher level model would get, oh, that's really cool. We got to write some fancy papers for Nature about how this explains the evolution of the auditory system, but it also explains, why do we speak the way we do? We're maximizing the channel capacity of the mammalian auditory system. Why do we hear the way we do? Because that behaviorally is the maximum information extraction from natural sound statistics. Cool. Could we do something with this? Of course, everyone's first idea is compression. And yeah, it actually works really, really well for compression. So it's a very sparse compressed code, so you're transmitting time, well, you can compress time and filter set together. So time difference plus magnitude, and you transmit, and you can get down to very, very low bit rates, like hundreds of bits. It's been more than a decade since I did this. Very, very low bit rates, and still have intelligible speech on the other side, well below, for example, experimental rates with phone systems and so forth. But that wasn't what I was interested in. So that is a cochlear implant. It's basically a hearing aid that is directly wired to the auditory nerve. So this is the only neuroprosthetic in standard use today. I'll talk about some others, but this is the only one standard use. So you get a diagnosis of peripheral hearing loss, essentially your cochlea is malfunctioning. you can get a hearing aid, and that is magnetically induced. So implanted under this baby's skull, and they literally will drill out the cochlea. I mean, literally just drill it out, blindly jam a bunch of wires in there. And then you have a magnet on the other side, and then the hearing aid connects with the magnet on the outside, so you can actually take it off. Early versions literally were just a wire that went right through the skull. But that's bad because people die from brain embolisms and infections. So now we have this thing. The amazing thing is you put this on a kit. It's got, the classic versions had like 6 channels. By comparison, there are about 30,000 inner hair cells transmitting this information about, not 30,000 inner hair cells, but 30,000 cochlear ganglion cells transmitting this information to the brain. So, you've dropped by 5 orders of magnitude the number of free channels you have to transmit information. And when we can simulate this, oh, do I even have that? I don't know, you may not be able to hear.
I'm pretty sure Steve,
Yeah.
I saw a campaign on Facebook. I think this technology is actually developed because they had a lot of
No, cochlear implants are definitely developed, yeah. In fact, they're a little bit controversial. So in the deaf populations, there are people that think cochlear implants would be the equivalent of saying, let's make everybody white. So it has a little bit of controversy to it. But if someone wants to make that choice, like they were hearing their whole life, for example, and they don't want to lose. But you're absolutely right, they've been around for a while. So just this is a simulation of wearing a cochlear implant. That is a very famous sound. Can anyone tell me what it is?